Good evening.
When you want to speak.
I'd like to call to order the meeting of the Zoning Commission, May 7th, 2019. The time is 7:04. Joe normally is the chair. I'm the acting chair, and please bear with me as we stumble through this together. Item 1 is to call the Zoning Commission meeting to order. Item 2, consider the approval of the March 5th, 2019 zoning meeting minutes. Do we have any comments on those minutes? Has anyone read the minutes? I have glanced at them. Ms. Baker? And let me back up. I failed to introduce you guys, and so let me do that. To my right, Ms. Baker, and one of our sit-in members is Don Rochelle. Okay, Don Rochelle. So we're working with a light crew today, but we're going to stumble through. So let's go back to the minutes, item 2.
I don't have any objections, but I don't know if it's appropriate to pass it off in case some of the other council members do. Or I'm not council members, you know what I mean.
Zoning Commission members.
These are minutes of a meeting that at least 2 of you attended, so if you're comfortable in making a motion to get it adopted, that would be appropriate. It's never a good idea to let minutes sit unapproved indefinitely because memories fade.
Okay. Thank you. So do I hear a motion to approve?
I move that we approve the minutes.
And do I hear a second?
I second.
All in favor, aye? I oppose, thank you. Item 3, public hearing and discussion on an application by Wayside Chapel Evangelical Free Church for an amendment to the special use permit originally granted on March 2011 to add property located at 113 Ivywood Circle, legal description CB 5007B, Block 3, Lot 3, to the property included under the SUP. And this is a public meeting. Mr. Gordon, I believe you were here to speak for Wayside. If you could please step forward to the mic and introduce yourself.
Good evening. My name is John Gordon. I'm the executive pastor at Wayside Chapel, and I'm the one who, on behalf of the church, authorized by the Board of Elders to make application for this request to amend the special use permit that we were granted originally back in 2011, and then that was amended in 2013. This is in regard to, and I'm trusting that you all have copies of the packet that we submitted with our application.
We do.
And I might point out that in the original SUP that was granted in 2011, this is concerning properties that are in a neighborhood that's immediately adjacent to the church, just east of our property, sharing the same property line. But there are a total of 12 properties in that neighborhood. The 2011 SUP covered properties 100, 102, 103, 104, 105, 107, 109, 111, 115, and 117 Ivywood, properties that the church owned at that time and still owns. This request to amend, adding a property that we purchased immediately adjacent to the church, 113 Ivywood, which the church purchased on February 14th of this year. Our request is based on the same request in the original SUP application that we had made and were granted for the church to be able to use that property for church religious purposes, as is granted with the other properties that are owned by the church. So of that neighborhood, the church now owns 11 of the 12 properties on that Ivywood Circle neighborhood.
Members, do we have any questions for Mr. Gordon?
Is the use going to be the same as the other properties, which were somewhat restricted to what, housing missionaries, et cetera? Is it going to be the same type of use, or are you going to have a modification for that building?
Same use. Let me point out that in the SUP that we currently have, 103 and 105 are two fully furnished houses that we use to house visiting missionaries, guest speakers to the church. Per that SUP, those houses were to continue to be used for that purpose. The remainder of the properties, including this property as well, will be used under the same guidelines and restrictions of the SUP as the SUP is now enforced.
Thank you.
Any other,
Oh,
I'm sorry, go, please.
How many missionaries do you typically have on site at any given time?
Oh, on-site? Oh, well, no more than, there's two houses, so we would only at most have two missionaries, one in one house and one in another house. And when I say one, that could be a missionary and spouse and/or children if they're with them. And again, it's temporary, it's short-term housing just while they're there visiting the church.
And how frequently are you having missionaries?
I'm gonna say maybe at most, maybe 6 times a year. It's
How-
not a continuous.
And how long do they normally stay?
Oh, there is I would say there's one that I'm aware of that when they came, they were missionaries like to Thailand, and so they would stay, they'd probably stay around 30 days. Typically, the stay is less than a week.
What are the other properties being used for that you had SUPs for in 2011, 2013?
Yeah, they're being used for classroom space, meeting space. One of the houses is, there are 2 ministries that the church supports, that they are using the house just for office space. That's in one of the houses.
So it's not like you're bringing in, I don't know, refugees or,
No, ma'am.
I'll let Tom ask some questions.
Let me ask a couple, and let me direct those first into the city manager and the city attorney. When the other SUPs were granted, there was an ordinance number 1069 that was attached. Is it the thought that that would be re-signed for this new property? Which basically, reading through it just kind of lays out what you just said, that it's going to be used for religious purposes, that you're not going to change the exterior of the properties, only the interiors, things like that, but I'm guessing that would be re-upped. Have you looked at that, Mr. Gordon?
Excuse me?
The ordinance 1069, have you looked at that? And I presume that this new property would follow under that ordinance 1069?
Yes. 1069 was the original SUP.
Okay.
And that lays out
Okay.
the guidelines of the SUP. In 2013, 111,
I got you.
you'll see that there were 3 properties that we were allowed to expand our parking into the backyards of those properties immediately adjacent to the church. And then there were 3 what we referred to as garden lots that the church owned along the north side of the property that we were allowed to pave and stripe parking. And then also the third condition was allowing the construction of that detention pond, which is primarily located on that 100 Ivywood property, going into a little bit into that 102 Ivywood property.
Okay, so I guess the way it works then, 1069 was the original, 1111 added on, and then we would have a similar SUP ordinance that would throw in 113?
The probable way, if this commission recommends approval of the amendment to
Right.
the special use permit, it would probably be documented by an ordinance. It must be documented by an ordinance, and that ordinance would be to amend ordinance number 1069, basically to add this property with the use as the pastor described. And that was something I'm glad he put on the record, that the use of the property at 113 would be for church and religious purposes.
Okay. So I just wanted to clarify that it would be attached onto what we already have in place. Mr. Gordon, I guess I can ask you this. So you mentioned before the meeting, I just asked you if you were here to speak on behalf of the church. You acknowledged that you were. And I think you said the church now owns 10 of 11 properties or 12 of 13. There was one property that you don't own. I'm guessing that the church is probably hopeful of getting that last property. And if and when you do that, does the church have some vision on what you may do, or is it too far out there?
Yes, when we originally submitted for the SUP in 2011, at that time, what we submitted was a conceptual plan because the zoning and the council wanted to know what our intent, what our long-term intent was. And so actually, I anticipated that question and brought along tonight, I only have one copy, but I'd be glad to pass it for you
Sure.
all to look at. But it's a conceptual plan.
Okay.
It's not that we haven't started going down this road yet.
Right.
So,
Why don't you pass it to Ms.
Sure.
Baker, and we'll,
Can you detail what those plans are? Other than through this, because the people in the audience can't see this either.
Yeah. You can just browse it, but that gives you an idea of what the, and I'll, for the sake of everybody in the audience. As we had submitted in 2011, that the conceptual plan that you're seeing there would potentially raise the houses to construct landscape parking so that then on the main campus that you can see that we're operating, that the main buildings are on, that of doing a build out for like a family life center and really consolidating some of those buildings. One of them is an office building on the north side of the property that we would tear down.
So what you're saying is that 12 of the properties, you own 11, are going to be turned into parking spaces?
That's a
Parking lot?
conceptual idea, yes.
This may be a question that's more appropriate for our city attorney. When I was looking through the ordinances that were granted in 2011, 2013, it says, "This special use permit sets no precedent for any other special use permits." How does that impact this request tonight?
Well, it only says that by granting that SUP in those years, the city council was not committing to issue any future SUPs or amendments. But this application should stand on its own merit.
When you made your presentation, it almost sounded like you were asking for a grandfathering of these properties. I understand that they're all in the same little cul-de-sac or street, but based on what the prior ordinances said, a grandfathering is not appropriate.
And the grandfathering wasn't, that wasn't my intent, is that we recognize that the city grants the SUP, and at the same time, we recognize that the city can also remove the SUP that's in place.
But doesn't the SUP also state that you have to keep the existing structures as they are? And if you're going to come and make a proposal, that's a whole nother SUP, is that correct?
That's correct.
All right, so,
Or either a whole nother SUP or
some other action.
Yeah,
So you have to still make
exactly.
an application before you can go forward with this conceptual plan.
Exactly, yes, yes.
You know, it's drainage, have you looked at the drainage issues? Because you're creating more impervious cover, and this is becoming a huge issue now. You already got one property there that's supposedly was purchased to be able to do that. But, you know, this is, have you looked into that as far as how that's going to work with your conceptual plan?
Yes, again, it's a conceptual plan, so no, we haven't even begun to cross that bridge yet. But in 2013, when we made the request for the amendment, that was part of an parking lot expansion project, and 40% of that project was drainage.
Yes. And that issue is becoming more severe as time goes on.
Yes.
This I think alt 14 or something that is dramatically impacting. And, okay.
Any further questions for Mr. Gordon?
Well, is having these periodic missionaries come in, is that going to, we're coming out with short-term rentals? Is this going to have any type of crossover? I know we're not going to cross that bridge tonight, but is that going to impact them? Or have you looked at that? Because we're looking at new ordinances for the short-term rentals.
I don't think the church's use will be subject to the short-term rentals because it's not really a rental. It is simply allowing a visiting missionary to have a place to stay while they are doing and fulfilling their mission. So it's not the same as a short-term rental of another property on another street.
Ms. Baker? Mr. Gordon, thank you. I think we have some citizens that would like to be heard, so if you can stand by and we'll let them come forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Are you finished with that?
Sure. Andy Ronan, Mr. Ronan, are you here? Okay. And Todd Herman? Okay. And Mr. Rodriguez?
Good evening, all. Thank you for the opportunity to speak and be here. I'll try to get right to the point. I'm not sure if there's a maximum time or minimum time up here. But I'm very knowledgeable and very fortunate, and I say in that knowledge, being around when parking, impervious cover, very, very important, and served this city even before 2000. I've been here almost 30 years, almost, and I'm at 110 South Garden View. Again, my name is Joe Rodriguez, 110 South Garden View. Wayside Chapel abuts property where I live. I've even been around from a standpoint of parking lots going to federal court. So I was around that time. And so from a standpoint, sir, when you'd mentioned some of the items, they are very, very important, all the items that you all had mentioned. So thank you in advance for that. There are some unusual particulars, same use. I'm not sure if you all do it here or when you pass it along to council, your decisions, if there's a check and balance or a checklist from a standpoint of making sure that Wayside Chapel has been in compliance to date with any modifications or things that they've done from a standpoint of HVAC and other things like that. Because what the city of Castle Hills requires its residents to do, it seems like they're getting a permit for everything all the time. There's an inspector around, somebody that goes by. You know, I'm not sure if you all checked that Wayside has been in compliance to date. As I mentioned before, all these other residential properties have to get permits for upkeep. Keep in mind that I see a lot that goes on. I could file an open records request before this goes through if necessary. What concerned me, I noticed that Mr. Gordon had mentioned a couple of ministries, but I think he only named one of those ministries for you. I didn't hear the name of the other ministry or the additional parties that were using these particular properties. And as far as this particular structure, I think that you all read it from a contractual perspective, the letter of the law. What was intended in 2011, ongoing, I think a citing of the year 2013 was also mentioned. My concern is, this particular structure, will it remain as is indefinitely? Because as time went on with this church and/or business entity, parking lots expanded, paving occurred, retention pond occurred, all these slightly different things that were more of a commercial twist than you would find in a normal residential neighborhood. It's not like I'm coming by to fix your street, the paving, or I'm TxDOT and I've got to resurface the curb or put the curb back because there was a car accident. Thank you so much in advance for recognizing those things, but also questioning that vision piece and whether the original 2011 pieces will legally hold intact versus the 2013 and movements forward versus that grand vision of the future when that last property would be purchased. What concerns me is the term of raised, I don't think it was raising, raised the houses for parking, tear downs, very striking, kind of scary things to think about in a residential neighborhood in a municipality that is completely landlocked. I know that Mr. Schnall had mentioned something, and I paraphrase, portion of it would have to stand on its own merit. So there's a lot of, some of the words that were mentioned, grandfather and other things. So I just want to say thank you for paying attention to those details, because not only have they affected us in the past, they will affect us in the future, and I'm very, very concerned, and I thank you for that concern.
Thank you. Mr. Gordon, he did raise a point about the two ministries. Do you want to maybe just say the names of those two ministries that serve there and what they do?
Yes, both of those ministries are supported by the church. One is African Renewal, with, obviously by the name, their ministry to country in Africa. And the other one is One Way International, which is more of their outreach is here domestically.
Thank you. Do we have any other citizens that would like to be heard at this time? If not, I'm going to close the public session and move to the closed session. Item 4, which is a discussion amongst members, council members, and I'll open it up.
Mr. Chairman, just
Yes.
for the record, you did not go to a closed meeting. You simply closed the public hearing and now returning to the regular meeting in
Thank you.
open session and going to item number 4.
Thank you for keeping me in line. Ms. Baker, you can have this chair next time. We need assistance.
You're doing a great job.
Mr. Aiken, I kept that chair warm for 12 years.
Okay.
Can you feel all the knowledge coming out of it?
Right.
I just want to say that under section 50-497B, the code says all districts except a district, which I believe is residential, in any district except A, the following uses may be requested for designation as special uses. And under that is religious or philanthropic institutions. That's section, or B, 2, under 50-497B2. I don't know that the code allows us to grant an SUP to a religious institution now?
I think that the zoning commission can recommend the issuance of a special use permit. A church use is a permitted use in the single-family A district. So if this property is zoned single-family A district, and churches are specifically permitted, then it makes sense to me that the commission could recommend a special use permit if it were so inclined.
Somebody say something. Okay, good. Mr. Rochelle, any discussion?
You know, I see a pattern in that location, and obviously you're being patient and waiting for the completion of it. I think down the line for your concept, there might be some issues. But at this time, I see your, you know, there, because you can, the SUP can be canceled by the city after a hearing of a pattern violation. So to the gentleman who spoke, yes, if there's violations, the city can do something about it and revoke the SUP. But there's a consistency there. They're moving forward. My only concern is, yeah, that we don't see the violations, but we seem to be protected that if we do see that, like I think Ms. Baker brought up about, or somebody brought up about, you know, are refugees coming in? And it's not that we don't want to be sensitive to that, but that's, I don't think that's what the SUP was allowing. So we seem to have that. I'm just letting you know that, again, if you go forward with that conceptual, there might be definitely some hurdles to think about. But other than that, I don't, you're being consistent. As long as you stay consistent, I feel that's, you're doing your part.
Well, let me throw in a few comments because Joe would. So I feel since I'm sitting in this chair, I can do that also. Ms. Baker, I think you and I were both here. I know we were here in 2013. I think we were both here in 2011. I think was maybe about my first year on this zoning commission. So we've seen this before. We knew what the church was kind of doing. I do remember the vision that that the church has laid out. So I think really the big questions aren't right now on this SUP. The big questions are going to come a year or two from now when maybe you want to move forward. At least that's my thought, because at that point in time there'll have to be quite a bit more work done. But I think I'm in agreement that right now we're looking at an SUP for one more property. There will probably be another one that'll come down the pipe in another year or two, so, or perhaps sooner than that. So I don't have a lot of other discussion from my end at this time, but that there will be more at somewhere down the line. I do appreciate Mr. Rodriguez's comments regarding, is the church conducting these properties as they should? I can tell you that's not something I think that is part of our commission to look at, our committee to look at, but it may be for someone else. But you're right, whenever I do something at my house, I usually get a note on the door, so I can appreciate that. Do we have any further comment? Yes, please.
One more question. What does the remaining resident there feel about you taking over and how you're conducting in the uses of the houses? They didn't show up to talk, but do you have any idea what their feelings are? The remaining resident.
Yeah, I can't speak for them, but I can say that when we first submitted in 2011 for the SUP and submitted the conceptual plan, that did not sit well with them, because their parents were living at the house at the time, and I had conversation with, I think it was one of the daughters, and the comment was made that you all are trying to run our parents out of their house, and I said that is not what we are trying to do.
Well, that's my question. I mean, the way you're using it, has there been any further comments from the remaining residents as far as a negative response to how you're using it? I mean, it seems pretty low intensity, but I don't know.
Yeah, there was we did hear from, I'm going to say it was probably 2 years ago, where they had retained an attorney who challenged the covenants of the neighborhood, but our real estate attorney answered him, and I can't remember the specifics of that, but on 3 grounds, and then we never heard from them again.
Okay, no more questions.
Okay, so I'm going to look back over to our city attorney. So at this time, I think we've exhausted our discussion. Do I call for a vote at this time?
First, there needs to be a motion,
Okay,
and then discussion on the motion, a motion, a second, discussion on the motion, and then a vote. So let's start with a motion, if there is one that someone wishes to make.
Do I have a motion on this SUP?
Yes, the motion. Well, I'd have to say what the motion is. The motion is for approval of the SUP.
And any discussion on that motion?
Was there a second?
Do I hear a second? I can second the motion?
Yes, sir.
I will second the motion. Now discussion. Thank you.
You're all looking at me like you're waiting for
I
me
know,
to say
I'm-
something.
You know, you
I'm
could have
sorry.
sat here.
I was here in 2011 with you, and at that point, we declined to recommend approval, and my opinion is the same today, and it's further supported by the code section I just cited, all sections except A, and it says the following uses may be requested for designation as special uses except A. So I think it's inappropriate. It was back in 2011, and council will make the ultimate decision.
City, Mr. Attorney, so, wait, Ms. Baker's reading it, and what you said, why is there seem to be a little conflict? I don't understand.
I can't speak to what the ordinance said in 2011 or 2013, although it appears to me that the ordinance was amended, the section that she was reading, ordinance section 50-497, appears to have been amended by an ordinance passed on September 12, 2017. So I do not know, sitting here, what section 50-497 read in 2011 or 2015, 2011 or 2013, but because a church is a permitted use in the A district, I'm comfortable in saying that they can come and ask for this permit. And attorneys often have different opinions about the same issue. So I can certainly respect Ms. Baker's position. There is even though someone commented earlier that there was something about no precedent, I think there are reasons why, under the current circumstances, that it would be inconsistent to deny this special use permit when 2 previous special use permits were granted, including a special permit in 2011 that allows the property on either side of this lot to be used for the same purpose that Wayside is requesting for this lot tonight. But that is a decision for this commission, and as was pointed out, ultimately a decision for the city council when whatever recommendation this commission makes is presented to the city council, probably in 2 weeks at the meeting on May 21st.
Thank you.
I don't have any further comments. Do either of the members have any further comments? Okay, we've had a motion, we've had a second. All in favor?
We have to have a motion to vote?
No,
No, now's a vote.
All in favor? So I don't have anyone in favor. I am in favor of the motion, but I am outvoted 2-1, it appears. Okay, so that is 2-1. Mr. Attorney, does that end this discussion on this topic?
yes, sir. Your recommendation will be presented through the city manager and his staff, will be made something for the agenda for the May 21st meeting of the city council.
Thank you. Motion does carry. Okay, and time is 7:40. We have two more agenda items, item 5 and 6. They both deal with the home occupancy and the short-term rentals. The zoning commission is pretty knee-deep in that, so I think if it's okay with the other members here present, I'd like to defer our further discussion until our next meeting so that we can have the group that's kind of carried us through get back into that. I don't know if I need to take a vote on that, or if I can just make that call myself.
Before you make that call.
Yes, sir.
We do have at least two people who indicated earlier in the meeting, Mr. Herman and Mr. Ronan, who had expressed an interest in commenting during a public hearing
Okay.
or during citizens to be heard. There is no citizens to be heard on this agenda. However, there is a public hearing, and it would be my recommendation that you open the public hearing on, and discussion. You open item number 5.
Okay.
Ask for any comments from those present who wish to make a comment or presentation to the commission, and defer any tabling or other action until at least those people who took the time and interest to come have an opportunity to speak.
Definitely. So let's do that. Let's move to item 5, and at this time, I will call Mr. Andy Ronan, if you'd like to speak. Okay, that's fine. If you would give us your name and your address when you come forward. And let me just throw in before you do start that it looks like that we will table this when you gentlemen get completed. There will be another meeting in June, so please feel free to come back at that point in time to the full committee. Yes.
I don't know if you guys are familiar. I was just going to discuss there was the Snack Bites development. I'm sure everybody's probably aware of that by now. And I didn't know what the appropriate form would be for that, but we're trying to find out in terms of what capacity zoning has in closing those two exits that exit from the commercial development on North Manton Lane and spill traffic onto North Manton Lane. And we did a lot of research during both the Architectural Review Committee meetings in terms of the history of those two exits. And apparently the city did not grant an SUP for the exits. They just technically made it illegal to make a left turn. And they made an ordinance thusly. So what we're trying to do right now is mostly an investigatory, I guess an inquiry, as to what capacity the zoning commission has in terms of closing those exits, or at least making it prohibitively difficult for that, whatever business is holding that location in the future to be able to exit onto North Manton Lane. I don't know if there's a...
You've brought it up. I'm going to look over at the table and see if the city attorney or manager would like to comment on that.
He walks down. I see him all the time. He's my neighbor.
The purpose of the zoning commission is to deal with land use. And although the subject that Mr. Herman is commenting on is tangentially related to land use, it seems to me that for it to be fully discussed at a zoning commission meeting, it would need to be on the agenda. And it would perhaps be on the agenda in the context of the zoning commission reviewing the district regulations for the G general business zone and determine if there's anything that could be added or changed in those regulations that would address Mr. Herman's concern. But for tonight, it's receive his comment, and the city manager will take it to the attention of the chairman of the commission for possible being placed on the agenda at either the next or a future meeting of the zoning commission.
Very good.
Okay, do I need to request that in writing, or can you just discuss it with someone and let me know if it's going to be placed on the agenda?
No, I can follow up with you.
Okay,
Todd.
cool, that'll work perfectly.
I would just like to comment on this.
Okay.
One of the things I think that needs to happen is get a consensus from the neighbors on what do they want to have happen. And because you will be impacting another business, isn't it a two-story building across from where the old IBC is now, where the Snack Bites wanted to go in? It's got a tennis shop, it's got a clothing store, and then there's office complex upstairs.
I think that was the next.
That's the next
That's
corner
one
down.
over.
Sunflower, yes, ma'am.
But there is a business directly across from IBC, isn't there?
Oh, wait, no, that's,
Near the
that's
coffee shop
Caliph.
there?
Yeah, that's Caliph.
Yes, ma'am, that's the
So yes,
Caliph
there's
Art
another
Gallery.
business there.
Mhm.
So, you know, you certainly would want to, as a neighborhood, ask what they think.
Well, what I did was, we did a lot of digging, because I guess the uniform consensus on the neighbors, on all of the neighborhood was that nobody wanted those exits to be put, or open to flow traffic, and so I actually I wrote and authored a petition and then had all of the residents sign it, and then we presented it, I believe we presented it at the ARC meeting, and it was pretty unanimous. And then we requested at the meeting that we would meet with the new owners to possibly come up with some kind of a compromise, you know, in terms of the use of those exits, and was ultimately not, well, I guess we were successful, the compromise was not.
So can you explain what y'all wanted to do? Did you want to own the street, close the street, restrict
Wow, that's a long
access?
conversation. Yeah, we ultimately would like to,
We really shouldn't be discussing
I was
this
gonna say,
in
that's a
depth
long
at all,
conversation.
because the agenda item was discussion on the recommendation of the zoning review committee regarding revisions to chapter 50, and the discussion to include home occupations and short-term rentals. And I think,
It's none
you know,
of
a
those.
citizen can make whatever comment a citizen wants to make during a public hearing, but the commission really shouldn't discuss something that is not properly on an agenda. And we've already indicated we're going to try and get this on the agenda either for the next meeting or a future meeting of the commission. Hold your questions till
Okay.
then if possible.
So thank you for bringing it to our attention.
No, my pleasure. And just to clarify, for agenda item number 5, that's going to be tabled for today and for a future meeting?
The short-term
The
rentals?
short-term rental
Yes.
okay, because I did
Yes.
have some comments on that, but if
Yeah.
we're going to do it again, I'll just save them for that time.
I would recommend you sign up for the next meeting
Yeah.
when the full membership is here.
Okay,
And I'll follow up with Mr. Herman and get with Mr. Isbrand on the future agenda for that item, the way it's styled
you.
by Mr. Schnall.
perfect, thank you.
Yes, please.
Hello, I'm Andy. Andy Ronan. I live at 102 North Manton Lane. And I would like to bring forth some discussion, hopefully during the next meeting, when it comes to zoning for drive-throughs on Northwest Military from 410 to the light at West Avenue. I think our quiet enjoyment of our city is at risk if we allow fast food type establishments to move into our neighborhood and use our private streets, our public streets, residential streets for commercial use. And I would like to see if we can get that on the next meeting, possibly talk about, changing the zoning for that.
Okay, so the city manager, will you follow up with Mr. Ronan also on that and see where we can go from there?
Yep, and again, speaking with Mr. Schnall, we can figure out how that might be styled on an
Right.
agenda for discussion in a future agenda. And we'll speak to Mr. Isbrand about when that might come up on a future meeting.
Right, thank you, sir.
And thank you.
Okay, if we have no other public voices, then I will close that portion of the meeting and now move to item 6, and just recommend that we delay this item until the next scheduled meeting of the zoning commission.
Chairman, I was going to mention that you have a copy of the home occupation section for your review, obviously prepared by Mr. Schnall. I'm working on the ordinance for the short-term rental. And once Mr. Schnall has reviewed, I'll send that out to the commission before the next meeting in anticipation of that being the agenda item for possibly approving the ordinance.
That'd be great. I know, we've spent a lot of time on this. I know we're all hoping to get through it in the next meeting, so that'd be great. Is there anything else that needs to come before the zoning commission? Can I even ask that question? I guess I can, and I don't see anyone raise their hands. So do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Seconded.